talks to the sea. She looks straight ahead, not at he. Tall and tan and young and lovely, the gal from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, he smiles, but she doesn't see.
Good morning. Welcome to our second day of a national conversation. We are so excited that you're here today. Yesterday, we had a wonderful conversation with President Carter and Derreck Kayongo, who's the CEO of the Center for Civil Rights and Human Rights. And then we had a fabulous panel discussion led by Jelani Cobb. Really, yesterday was talking about the meaning of civil rights and human rights and how do we get involved in civic participation. Today's discussion is about how activism leads to awareness around civil and human rights. And so I'm excited about that. My name is Dr. Meredith Evans. Welcome to the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum. We are happy to host this. We are excited that you're here. There are a couple of housekeeping issues that I'd like to share with you. There's no flash photography in here or in the museum. So when you tour the museum, which you will, there's no flash photography. During the panel discussion, there are cards in your program. Please put your questions on these cards and you can pass them down and we'll have volunteers pick them up. And we'll try to get as many questions in as we can. We have an online community that will also be providing questions. So if your question doesn't get answered, it's not because we didn't want it answered. It's because we also are responding to the Twitter feed and the webcast participants. Please put your phones on vibrate, just in case you want to tweet. And if you're not tweeting, just turn it off. I think that's it for housekeeping. We have Patrick Madden coming up to talk about the program.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Meredith. Meredith and the Jimmy Carter Library and Museum have been terrific partners, so I want to thank you for all you've done. And I'm pleased to welcome everyone on behalf of the Archivists of the United States, the National Archives, and the National Archives Foundation. We are the private partner to the National Archives based in Washington, D.C. I also want to welcome all of our online viewers. We want to see you be very active, so please forward your questions and comments as the program goes on. The national conversation you're about to participate in is part of a larger initiative of the National Archives called Amending America. It was launched earlier this year in conjunction with the 225th anniversary of the Bill of Rights. You all have that on your calendar. It's in December of this year, so mark that down now. The Amending America initiative includes a major exhibit in Washington, D.C. at the home of the National Archives, a traveling exhibition, educational materials for classrooms and libraries, as well as a ton of online resources. But one of the flagship elements are the national conversations. It's a 6-city series where we're going to be looking at rights and justice issues. We're going to explore immigration, education access, LGBTQ issues, women and gender issues, and of course civil rights here in Atlanta. None of this would be possible without the support of a small army of staff at the National Archives, especially the Education and Public Programs team, and at the Carter Library. Their team was fantastic. And I want to thank all of my team from the National Archives Foundation for their contribution. In addition to the staff's blood, sweat, and tears, this couldn't happen without financial support. We're especially thankful for our lead sponsor, AT&T, as well as the Ford Foundation and Seedlings Foundation. Now I'm happy to introduce an introductory film featuring Congressman John Lewis about Amending America. Thank you and enjoy the program.
The Constitution is a living document. It is not static. As citizens, we need to make it real, not just for some of us, but for all of us. The phrase "with liberty and justice for all" mean all. We're one people. We're one family. We're the American family.
The discovery of an individual's liberty is one of the foundational values of being an American citizen. America has been struggling to define the rights and justices associated with that liberty since the creation of its Constitution. From this struggle evolved the monumental Bill of Rights and 17 more amendments to define and protect our liberties. Over time, the amendment process has been tested by a nation whose national sense of liberty, equality, and the inclusion of all citizens evolved with turbulence and struggle.
When we were planning the March on Washington in August of 1963, I would hear Dr. King say things like, "We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools."
Freedom, true freedom, is not given by governments. Freedom is taken by the people. The people of America are becoming aware that this freedom to their fellow human beings, and I call them human rights, are theirs to give.
The issues that compel America to continue to define equality and fairness, I think it's innate. I really believe that it's in our soul, that we believe in freedom, freedom of the individual. We believe that humans have a right to peacefully coexist with fellow human beings.
So there are two monumental statues on the Pennsylvania Avenue side of the National Archives building. One inscribed, "Study the past," the other, "What is past is prologue." The message is, we should be able to learn from our history so that we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over. And the role of the National Archives is to ensure that people have access to the records that demonstrate how those rights were achieved so that we can learn from those records.
With over 11,000 proposed amendments to the Constitution, and only 27 of those actually ratified, our pursuit of rights and justice continues to be a vibrant part of our democracy. It's up to every generation of Americans to own our democracy and continue this national dialogue of defining our personal liberties.
It is very, very important for all of us as citizens, for all of us as one people, to take ownership of our system of justice. This is our democracy. It belongs to all of us. We must talk about it. We must debate it. We have to continue to fight every single day. If we do not, we will go backward. We don't want to go backward. We want to go forward and complete our effort to create a more perfect union.
So I want to say a few things before we start. Dr. Maurice Hobson is a professor at Georgia State. He studies African American culture and history and popular culture, and has a fabulous book soon to come out on the city of Atlanta, where he really talks about the civil rights movement, the challenges and triumphs of Atlanta, and the participants of the city in that movement. And so he'll be hosting that panel and moderating that panel, and we're looking forward to that. But before that, we have a very, very special treat. Abyss. I just love that, Abyss. He's a Peabody Award-winning poet and musician. He's appeared on HBO Def Jam, of Def Poetry, BET Lyric Cafe. He's the first poet on 106 Park, which is also amazing. And he's done things on gospel albums, and my favorite artist, Prince. He's just a fabulous person. And what's significant about this time that we're sharing from Abyss is that civil rights, freedoms, equality can be expressed in the record, in the written record, the oral record, visual arts, visual records, and in spoken word. And so we look forward to your performance of this.
Thank you all for having me. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't quote Nina Simone, who is one of the ancestors who I get a lot of inspiration from. She said, your art should reflect the times that you're living in, until there's a time that we could actually reflect the times that we would like to see. So with that being said, we're going to pay tribute to the ancestor as well. Beautiful. It's called Misunderstood. Misunderstood. Don't let me be misunderstood. Check it. Lights out, but the baby's hungry. Stressed up to here, they're dependent on me. I'm trying to be friendly, but my burden's lonely. I put my faith in God, depend on Him only. Have grace on my family and homies. I got horsepower, I can't run with these ponies. How sweet the sound, sour to phonies. Feeling like Lazarus amidst these zombies. Compared to wading pools, I'm like two tsunamis. I was made in His image, the presence is on me. No fear, I'm like a one-man army. I got a bulletproof spirit, cause the favor is on me. Some rappers straight acting, trade their Grammy for Tonys. Black owned, black operated, they can't own me. I don't step, I won't fetch it, that's so corny. Prostitution, some just do it for money. Spoken word, oh no, don't let me be misunderstood. Please, oh, no, don't let me be misunderstood. Nina Simone was one of the greatest. Don't let me be misunderstood. So this freedom of speech has helped me, so y'all can see what it's done. So, hey, they wanna noose me in the media and lock my bowels from the poison that they feeding us. They shot down anybody that was leading us and wrote us criminal like ain't nobody reading books. They play us minimal like all it is beats and hooks. They clock my decimals, that's the greed of a crook. This a given, hard not to get took. Food for thought, y'all eat, I cook. Cause this ain't weak and I ain't shook. Cause these jokers playing spades but I ain't the book. Cause they know that I'm king but you playing me rook. Get your hands off me, baby, leave me put. Yeah, you probably know this if you was reading a book. It's like a burnt offering, I leave a mic in soot. I run lines like an athlete's foot. Hallelujah, Sherrod, come on and bring in the hook. Oh no, don't let me be misunderstood, ladies and gentlemen. We have all benefited from this freedom of speech, please believe it. It's the equalizer, y'all, for those. A voice for the voiceless. Don't let me be misunderstood. What your grandma used to tell you. The life we lead will always lead us, and we pray.
all need Jesus.
Hey.
The life we lead.
Say what?
Will always lead us.
Uh-huh.
And we pray that He
And I'm gonna leave y'all with this.
will never leave us.
They say change gon' come whether you like it or not. They say freedom, it ain't free, it might cost me my knot. Said the enemy is salty, starting to feel like Lot. Same thing, got Biggie and Tupac shot. We supposed to move mountains, but we stuck on these rocks. Got some big shoes to fill, I double up on my socks. On this shoestring budget, and it's tied up in knots. We got a black president, yes, his name is Barack. But if my freedom got the cost, y'all can give me a box. I'd rather walk it out with God, call me Enoch. Cause change is gonna come till my walk is done. So I shine in the name of the one. But don't let me be misunderstood. Don't let me be misunderstood. Don't let me be misunderstood. Peace. Thank you.
Good morning, all. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Maurice Hobson. My day job is that I am an assistant professor of African American Studies and historian. I'm delighted to be here, and I was thankful when Dr. Evans asked me to come through because I have the unique disposition of two things. First and foremost is I actually study the city of Atlanta, and what I write about the city of Atlanta is not always favorable in terms of how it is seen. But the second thing is I grew up in Selma, Alabama. My principal in high school was the Reverend Dr. F.D. Reese. Jean Jackson was my 6th grade social studies teacher. The wife of Bob Mance, Joanne Mance, was my 7th grade social studies teacher. And so the conversation around civil and human rights is something that is near and dear to my heart as a result of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 coming out of Birmingham, where I went to college, and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 coming out of my hometown. It is a pleasure for me to moderate this panel today. I'm sure it will be spirited. Of course, it is entitled Taking a Stand, Activism Today. And before I introduce the panel, I think we should set the stage for some different things. There are numerous ways in which scholars engage the ideas of civil and human rights. And one of the ways in which we do this is that we must challenge frameworks, or what historians call historiographies. And so oftentimes the way in which civil and human rights has been presented is often this male charismatic leader. And we must challenge a lot of these notions. And so I want to share some things with you all in terms of how we should challenge these ideas and then how we should challenge
the agency, or how we should look at agency in terms of how we fight oppression. The first thing that we must challenge is the periodization of civil and human rights. So oftentimes, as Bayard Rustin termed the phase, the classical phase, we often think that civil rights starts in 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education, and then it ends in either 1965 with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, or with the assassination of Dr. King and the Fair Housing Act. The truth of the matter is that it extends well before, and it is still a major issue today. And so as a result of that, I mean, I can give you numerous examples of it extending before 1954. I mean, the Dred Scott decision in 1857 is a conversation around citizenship. Elks v. Wilkins, Smith v. Allwright, 1944, Morgan versus Virginia. We can even look at some of the things that have gone past 1968, particularly the Selby Haitian Centers Council in 1993. And so all of these are conversations around civil and human rights. We also must engage the idea that these struggles are not just local struggles or national struggles, but are international struggles. And so when we see this, have this understanding of struggle, we need to understand that it is actually global. The third thing that we must really challenge in terms of this is challenging that male charismatic middle class leader and really focusing and looking at more organic grassroots organizing and how things should take place. So as a result of this, examples of this would be here in Atlanta, Dorothy Bolden, who created the National Domestic Women's Union, which is now the National Domestic Women's Alliance, that created uniform policies for domestic workers in the city. Or champions such as Fannie Lou Hamer, who was merely sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so we must challenge those ideas. And as a result of this, we must push the boundaries of how we understand civil and human rights. We must understand that there are numerous issues that are taking place that fall into the category of civil and human rights. We certainly have conversations around citizenship and access in terms of gender equality, in terms of workman compensation, in terms of the LGBTQ community, in terms of immigration, and all other aspects of things. As a result of this, we have a wonderful panel that has been assembled to engage all of these areas. And at this time, I'd like to introduce the panel. The first person that I would like to introduce is the scholar and activist and artist Fahamu Peku. Mr. Peku is a visual and performing artist and scholar whose work combines observations of hip-hop, fine art, and popular culture. It is often said that if you want to find the sentiments of a people, that you must study the art, because this is where we see where things are being absolutely expressed. Mr. Peku, through visual performance and academic work, he addresses concerns around contemporary representations of black masculinity. He is currently pursuing his PhD from the Institution of Liberal Arts at Emory University, yet he also maintains a very active exhibition schedule and does work in terms of public lectures at numerous public historical venues. The second panelist that I would like to introduce is Dr. Emiko Soltis. Professor Soltis, she told me that we only wanted to say doctor one time. So, you know, I do want to respect that. She's a professor of human rights and documentary photographer and the executive of Freedom University. Her areas of specialty include human rights, social movement theory, global studies, farm worker movements. She did her undergraduate training at the University of Georgia. For those who are members of the Bulldog Nation, you have someone who is amongst us. She did her PhD training at Emory University, and she wrote a dissertation that discussed human rights strategies and cultural practices, particularly of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, an interracial farm worker organization in South Florida. She has done yeoman's work in mentoring undocumented youth and providing them with education and skill to be effective leaders in their own freedom struggle. Last but not least, and so, I'm just going in the order. We have PhD candidate Carrie Freshour. She's a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at Cornell University. Her areas of specialization include gendered and racialized practices in social reproduction, the political economy of food work, and racialization in the American South. She's currently conducting field research in Northeast Georgia, where she examines gendered and racialized practices of social reproduction amongst Black and Latina workers. Latina workers. I want to be clear that I indicate the gender piece because that is a necessary piece that should be discussed. She also details how the experiences of women who work on the poultry line and on the line in the poultry plant are inextricably linked to their social positions and place-making strategies in their outside lives. Now, for those in the audience and for those who are streaming, I would like to ask you all to remember that if you're interested in social media, engaging social media, you can tag with hashtag rights and justice. If you're interested in tagging the U.S. Archives, you can do so at US Nat Archives or at the Carter Library. So without further ado, please give a round of applause for the panel. So the first question that I would like to ask the panel, and feel free to answer when you feel led to answer, is what do you think are the major issues in civil and human rights in today's society?
Sure, well, I think you kind of, well, first of all, hello, everyone. Happy to be here and happy to be a part of this panel. But I think you really touched on that with your opening statement, especially the aspect of looking at civil and social justice movements as having some sort of archetypal leader. And, us as citizens participating in the society, sitting and waiting on that leader to emerge before taking action, before taking a stand, not recognizing that we as individuals have, agency and have power to effect change in the world that we participate in. And I think that becomes a major challenge, again, because, the ways in which, particularly the civil rights movement of the 60s has become so iconified, in our minds. We imagine, that in order for there to be any change, we have to have that same sort of model. We're expecting, we're waiting, we're anticipating that model as opposed to, recognizing that, I can actually do something from where I stand. I don't have to be, I don't have to lead a march on Washington to make a change in my world. So.
Okay.
I would add, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I do want to add that I want to challenge this notion of civil and human rights. I think that distinction is a disservice. Civil rights is only one pillar of the human rights framework. They also include political rights. They include economic rights and justice. They include social rights and cultural rights, right? This includes our right to education, the right to food and water, the right to join unions, the right to speak our own language. These are human rights, and civil rights is just one part of it. So I think it hurts our understanding of human rights when we distinguish civil rights as something separate, right? So I do want to challenge that. But I think it's also important, I like what you said about the global aspect of it, and that is what the power of the human rights framework is, right? That we have these rights by virtue of our humanity, not what borders we cross, not where we were born in some arbitrary line on this earth. And so understanding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think, is essential, not simply constitutions of national governments. And within the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there are many rights that are articulated there that we still do not respect in the United States. And this includes, for example, Article 13 and the freedom of movement, right? To cross borders and to be able to live and survive. This includes the right to a family as a fundamental unit of society. And deportations, we are expecting another round next week on Memorial Day weekend. This absolutely undercuts this notion that the family is a fundamental unit of society, and we are separating parents from their children, right? This includes Article 23, the right to join unions, to fair pay, to equal pay for equal work, right? And when we're understanding especially the history of the Black freedom movement, understanding what jobs that slaves worked in the fields as farm workers, in the house as domestic workers. Farm workers and domestic workers still lack the right to join unions. This is not a coincidence, right? Finally, I want to point to Article 26, which is the right to education. Again, this is not a civil right, but a social right. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognizes that everyone has the right to an education, and the right to higher education shall be based on merit, right? In the state of Georgia, undocumented youth are banned from public higher education. There are 3 states in the country that ban undocumented youth from higher education. Do you want to take a guess where that is?
The American South.
The South, right? So it's South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. Again, not a coincidence. So I want to take a moment to look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and how the US Constitution and an understanding of civil rights is oftentimes incompatible with the values articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I want to expand that notion today in this dialogue.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I feel honored to be on this amazing panel. I think actually Abyss covered a lot of what I would like to talk about today. I mean, it's not just about surviving, as Amika pointed to, but also thriving. In a country today where over 40% of workers make under $15 an hour, I think that's a huge organizing point for civil rights movements today is the living wage, increasing the living wage for all workers. Additionally, I'd like to talk a little bit about paid sick days. So this is a huge concern of mine in expanding how we view workers as not just people who are sort of robots or machines, but people with entire families, people with support systems who support others beyond themselves. So having the right to access time from work that is compensated to care for others. So those are the 2 main issues I'd like to point to. And also, I really like what Dr. Hobson is pointing to is the everyday forms of resistance that happen at very local levels, but may even connect to international struggles. So this is sort of the importance of understanding the leadership of maybe or most often women who are not recognized as traditional leaders, right? Mothers, and then also youth. I think youth are inspirational for me in any sort of social justice organizing today. And so recognizing their contributions to organizing is very important to me. Thank you.
Okay. Let me frame this in this capacity. In listening to the panelists, I'm reminded of the song by Sweet Honey and the Rock entitled Ella's Song, referring to Ella Baker. And the words are, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." And one of the things that I often teach my students is that when we understand oppression, isms, ISMs, whatever, racism, classism, sexism, we must understand it from the frame of it being prejudice plus the use and the abuse of power. Power dictates policy. Policy creates law. And so the question that I have to the panel in terms of civic participation, how can we combat racist policies, sexist policies, atrocities on gendered bodies in terms of policies and different components in terms of focusing, using our ideas and passions to do so? How can we do that? How can we challenge legislation? Right now in the state of Georgia, we have legislation that was challenged, and the way in which it was really knocked back was the threat of losing $6 billion. And so this claret red state became increasingly moderate when the pocket was about to be hit. And so with that being said, can you speak to the ways in which we can organize and challenge these particular isms?
Want to take a stab, Karin?
Sure. For me, I'll just talk a little bit about the work that I'm involved in. So in Athens, Georgia, there are several problems in Athens, Georgia, and in the state as a whole. I'd say the major movements that I'm involved in are similar to Miko's in education access. So I work with a group of students at ULEAD, which is founded by an amazing group of activists and university professors at UGA, as well as local high school teachers. And they provide educational support for immigrant youth. And many of those youth are undocumented themselves or the children of undocumented parents. And so the way that we challenge the ban on undocumented students, which is a legislative ban and created by the Board of Regents in the state of Georgia, we work to organize and create awareness by publishing information about these students' lives, by working with them to apply to universities that do allow them access, and by getting out the word just to Georgia residents about this ban. So many people are even unaware of the ban. So I think it takes many different people working on many different fronts. So it takes the sort of in the streets form of activism, right? Mobilizing, becoming more visible, but also the sort of educational and consciousness raising form of activism. So those are two fronts that I think ULEAD really works from. And then as far as the Living Wage campaign in Athens, Georgia, I work with the Economic Justice Coalition and then the Athens Immigrant Rights Coalition. So these two groups work together to increase visibility on wage exploitation and just the lack of living wage jobs in Athens, Georgia. So they're working to change local commissioners' opinions on living wage campaigns, but also, again, getting out the word to working class families, allowing them to know that they have a right to organize and they have a right to demand living wages in their jobs. And I think these two fronts are very important. So not only speaking to legislators, but also organizing working class folks.
I'll add to that as well. When you posed the question, immediately came to mind a cartoon that I saw, a political cartoon some time back, but it shows a figure who's, obviously supposed to be like some kind of leader standing behind a podium. He has his, fist raised, and he's talking to this huge crowd of people. He's apparently their leader. They're getting their power from him. But actually the guy is standing on a plank that's hanging over a cliff. And the only reason that he's being held up is because the people are standing there. And I always found that really interesting, especially when we say things like power to the people, when it's really power of the people. And it makes me think of, really one word, engagement. When we talk about power, when we talk about policy, I'm often really amazed at how many people just simply do not engage in the process. We anticipate that there'll be this change. We anticipate that this person is going to work on our behalf. But how can that person work on your behalf if you're not engaging them? And so I think that really becomes at the core of your question is that notion of engagement. How are we engaging in the first place?
I would like to add to that in terms of we are in the midst of an extremely vitriolic and volatile political theater on all sides. So I hope I was expressive, but I'm not endorsing anything, but I hope I was expressive. And one of the major questions is whomever will be president now, and we all understand that. I mean, in order to make change, you must vote at the most basic level and then demand up. So we understand that. But there's some issues in the United States, and we all know this. And all of the candidates, most of the candidates have not really reached out to marginalized communities to grapple with the issues within these numerous communities. Mm-hmm. So how is it that we, as the people, should demand those that are seeking power to really bow to the behest of the people? What should we state to, or how should we engage a Bernie Sanders or a Hillary Clinton or a Donald Trump? How should we engage them to truly get them to understand that we have problems and we elect? And as Fahamu stated, I mean, like, we don't always participate how it should be done, but people are angry and people are hurting. So if we could move in that direction.
I'll start with my T-shirt, which I work for Freedom University, Georgia, which is a modern-day freedom school for undocumented students. Freedom University was named after the Southern Freedom School tradition of building leaders from the grassroots of education for action. So Freedom University, Georgia was also, the name was chosen because we have an amazing acronym, which is FU Georgia. And so when we're talking about voting, yes, that's one way to participate, but I work with people who are explicitly denied the right to vote. I'm working with people who are denied the right to education, but they have the right to drive, they have the right to work. They have the right to drive to low-wage jobs, but not the right to vote to change it. So we do this, right? Maybe you guys did not know, but 2 weeks ago, undocumented students stormed the Board of Regents before they had their meeting and took over the seats of the board. And they held their own hearing on policy 416 and 434, which banned them from higher education and in-state tuition. They held their own hearing. They called up state senators, undocumented students, and learned about the facts, right? No, they don't have the power to vote, but because they do build power amongst themselves, they can participate. They can demand power from these politicians who are ignoring them, right? But we have 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country who are denied the right to vote. But at the same time, citizenship will not save any of us. That's right. It did not protect blacks from lynching after they got citizenship. It did not protect Latinos from being deported in the 1930s, even if they were American citizens. It did not protect Japanese Americans who were citizens from being interned, right? So it has to be beyond citizenship, has to be beyond voting. It is power, it is participation, it is holding people accountable. So, you know.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I think she nailed that one.
I think so. Let me ask you all something. So we are now in the era of social media. And recently at Georgia State University, we had a conference called Du Bois in the 21st Century, looking at William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, the famous scholar that called America out in terms of race and set the stage for a lot of different things to kind of take place. And one of the things we discussed is, what would W.E.B. Du Bois do if he had social media? You know, like, what would his hashtags be? Like, how many fights would he get into in a week? And so,
World star.
right. But I want to ask the question, what are the strategies, particularly in terms of movements from generations to generations? What are some of the new strategies that we see? And I think Dr. Soltis, actually stated, I mean, we're talking about undocumented workers who can drive to work and be taxed. Yep. I mean, they're taking money for you to go to the public school system. Well, you're paying for the public school system, but you can't go to the public school system. And that's the same thing as, before integration. I mean, if I worked a job, I mean, my money went to support the University of Georgia, but I could not go. Plessy versus Ferguson made public facilities white private property. Yeah. And so can we talk about some of the new ways and the new methods that are used by this generation that are different than older generations, and how that can somehow butt heads amongst the generations? There needs to be generational dialogue. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if anyone has ever read this book. It's called In Search of the Black Fantastic by Richard Eisen. Yes. It's one of my favorite books. But in that text, he actually makes reference to the fact that that resistance movements and resistance methodologies are anticipated by the system. And as such, you can't keep redoing the same type of resistance movement over and over again, because the system actually is set up. Yeah, it adapts to that. It wants you to have a march, because then it looks like, oh, we're letting something happen, and but nothing ever actually happens. And so I think, when we begin to think about, especially social media and the ways in which social media has activated, a new era, a new type of activism, like the Black Lives Matter movement and other such movements. I think those kinds of things really become imperative. But I also think that, parallel to those should also be ways for people to be educated and to engage. You can't just say there's a movement and then expect people to really understand what, people might participate, they might jump in the crowd, but they don't really know, if they don't know what they're marching for or they're, shouting for, then what's the point, right? So how can we also educate people about, processes, because I think a lot of times people don't engage because they don't know how, right? So how do we engage people in terms of the educational process as well? I think it's equally important. And using social media as a means to do that, I think is a great tool.
Hashtag rights and justice. But would anyone else like to add to that?
I could add a little bit. So I think that social media has been amazing in changing who has access to the movement and who has, so not everyone can be in the streets, right, every week, but everyone can tweet and everyone can engage in some sort of dialogue online. But that being said, I still am a little old school, and I think that being for this face-to-face interaction and organizing, that takes time, takes energy, is important. But to do that better, I know there are so many limitations to who has time and energy to organize, right? So also understanding that is paramount for me in organizing. But just on a grassroots level, a lot of the groups that I've been involved in, we use social media to raise funds. So it's like a sort of wealth redistribution, which I think is so important. For a group of us who work in Athens with families who have been affected by deportations, so oftentimes, I think we've worked with over 20 families right now. The male breadwinner is deported. They're targeted for driving without a license to and from their low-wage job. And so who's left behind is often a partner and their children, a woman and their children. And so through social media organizing, we've been able to raise funds to meet that immediate need of, those emergency needs financially, which has been so powerful to see people from all over the country sort of support those families without knowing them face to face. So all that being said, I think both tactics are important.
If I can respond to that, I think, honestly, social media is overrated. I think it's new, but I don't think it's magic. I think similar things are probably said about newspapers and radio, that is going to suddenly change things and a political revolution would happen. It's a tool, and it depends on how you use it if you have a strategy. But what I learned, yes, I got my doctorate at Emory, but I got my education in the fields of South Florida. With workers from Haiti, from Mexico, from Guatemala. And the media they used was radio, like legit 2005 radio, right? And it was Radio Conciencia, and it was in multiple languages, in Spanish, in Cachiquel, in Haitian Creole, right? And that's how they reached newly arrived immigrant workers. And so I was not very much fazed by social media. It was radio and talking to people, getting out in the streets at 4 a.m. when workers were getting recruited for work. That's how you connect with people. And at Freedom U, you were talking about this intergenerational dialogue, and I think that's crucial. Luckily, being in Atlanta, we have a lot of SNCC activists and veterans who are still very, very active. In particular, Lonnie King, Charles Black, Constance Curry. They've come to Freedom U and have spoken with students. In 2014, there was a 50th anniversary conference of Freedom Summer down in Jackson, Mississippi, and taking undocumented youth to meet these veterans who are still extremely active, literally running around, playing hooky from the conference, driving off with their old friends. It was awesome to see, but the dialogue was incredible. A lot of the veterans were saying, but you guys have social media. At Morehouse, there was one phone in our dorm, right? We're like, still, youth are bombarded with social media, right? There still needs to be that face-to-face communication. And when you see an action on Facebook and who's attending, I promise you 20% are going to come. As an organizer, you count on 20% of the people who say they're coming as showing up. But I tell students, when you do face-to-face, am I going to see you on Saturday? You remember your face of your friend, and you're like, ugh, can't miss that, right? But you can pretend you didn't see that invite on Facebook really easily, right? And so all of the actions that we plan are face-to-face. We don't have Skype sessions. We don't have Google Hangouts. We meet up, right? And we practice. We build trust amongst each other, right? And accountability. And so in that sense, I don't think social media can really change those things. That trust, that collective power comes from face-to-face interactions, and social media can't change that.
Well, yeah, that's a great segue into asking the question. So what are the common threads between movements of today and movements of yesteryear? Tell me some of the common threads. I mean, we have ideas about different things, but like immigration is not a new topic. It's been an issue since the Constitution was established in 1788 and thus far. So can we have some discussions on the common threads for how it manifests differently in terms of the generations? Well, let me put this in context like this. So when you study civil rights, so there's this ongoing conversation right now around civil rights, black power, or whether or not it's one black freedom struggle. And depending on what camp you're in, you get into these conversations. So you have these conversations around the classical phase of civil rights, which is the 54 to 68 or 65. You have the long civil rights, and then you have what they call the vampire thesis, which kind of challenges the long civil rights. And the conversation becomes that civil rights is like this middle class kind of gradual movement, whereas black power was young, working class, and somebody was going to get smacked in the face. It was like, you know, the jackanapes and whatnot. And so, you know, as a professor who interacts with young people all the time, you know, the one thing that we often say is, you know, this generation is used to instant gratification. I mean, you know, you ask them to write a paper, they go on Wikipedia, they cut and paste, and then they get charged for plagiarism. So there are similar things, but it manifests itself differently in these generations. Can we discuss those kinds of things?
Yeah, I'll start and just and frame it in the context of an exhibition I currently have at the Museum for Civil and Human Rights. So I have an exhibition there called Talking Drum, which really looks at the impact of popular culture, music, in the civil and social justice movements of the 60s and 70s. And it was inspired by a book that I read called Listen, Whitey, that, you know, really kind of chronicled the movement, the civil rights movement through the popular music that was recorded during that era. And really thinking about how, you know, good or bad or indifferent, the ways in which popular culture, you know, becomes a way to spread information. You know, it might have challenged that guy who was just absolutely disinterested in any kind of politics or civil rights movement, but when James Brown made a song, all of a sudden now he wants to, you know, think differently, and how can I get involved, how can I engage? And thinking about the impact of the arts and thinking about the impact of popular culture on those movements. And as I worked on that project, I couldn't help but think about, you know, today's times and, you know, the lack of, you know, popular culture or music or entertainment that is conscious in that same regard. But at the same time, you know, began to think about it differently in terms of not looking for the exact same pattern. Exactly. You know, how are the artists of today thinking about their role in the world, and how are they using their stages and their platforms to engage in issues of social justice and civil and human rights. You know, I recently wrote an article for NBC News about Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Grammy Awards, and the ways in which he, you know, was able to channel, you know, a very effective political statement through a performance on a stage that was not anticipating, you know, that kind of performance. And I found that to be really impactful and really powerful, but very different from what might have been done in the 60s or 70s, you know. And so I think it's important that we, you know, as we think about the connections or the parallels between the two, that we also think about the context of the artists who are performing and how they are choosing to, to enact those performances.
Can I add on that? Sure. So I really like what you said about the impact of art on movements, but I also want to talk about movements as art and how theater and performance and music can actually be a part of the actual struggle and the strategy. For example, I think it's important to understand a lot of the youth activism of the Black freedom movement was theater in the sense that they were demonstrating what was possible, right? The lunch counter sit-ins was their theatrical performance of their idea of freedom, right? They were practicing the world that they wanted. And the freedom rides, similarly, showing what was possible. It was the dress rehearsal, right, for reality. And knowing those strategies, art as strategies and movements, has influenced my work, the work of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. If you look at them, they are like carnivals in the streets with puppets and music, bringing together different groups. And in the documented student movement, for example, if you see photographs of our direct actions, it's evolved over time. A lot of people think of the movement as people being in graduation gowns, right? Symbolizing education. But undocumented students in Georgia have also taken on the symbolism of monarch butterfly wings, right? As symbolizing migration, transformation, freedom of movement over borders as something natural and beautiful, right? And so you see these photographs of the integration of the University of Georgia, not a coincidence, and of just this past February 1st, on the anniversary of the Greensboro lunch counter sit-ins, more than 100 students occupied classrooms at Georgia State, at UGA, at Georgia Tech, and the undocumented students were wearing monarch butterfly wings, right, to symbolize they were undocumented, but it was that creativity.
I also want to jump on what Amiko's saying about practicing the world you want, or we want. I think learning from social movements of the past, especially for me, I think the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program has been so inspirational for just a grassroots movement organizing today. And any movement that I've been involved in, when food is provided, when you share a meal, that really really helps to build trust. It helps to bring people to the table. It also, sort of, you can't provide a meal or share a meal over Facebook or Twitter, right? So this is something that I think is still so important in organizing today, is looking at basic needs, looking at what people, how we can bring people together to care for each other on like a very human level. That's been the Black Panther Party, and that program is so influential today.
I do want to mention too, Carrie's being modest, but I first saw her face when I was doing the behind-the-scenes organizing work for those classroom integrations this last spring, and I collected all the mugshots, and hers was one of them. So she was integrating the classroom with students at UGA too, so I do want to recognize her involvement and sacrifices for the undocumented student movement too. My job was getting people out of jail and talking to moms, which is not fun, but Carrie did put herself on the line in solidarity with undocumented youth.
I want to, this is a great segue into the next, capture the spirit, particularly of those that have gone before, to try to recreate the best kind of story. And so there is a real commune amongst the ancestors and those that have gone before us to make sure that you get the story right. But I will tell everybody in this room this. One of the reasons I sit here as a professor is I am the biggest Outkast and Goody Mob fan in the world. And I'm serious. And so in listening to the music, what I began to understand is, I mean, the music was great, but it was actually telling a story about what I call the Olympification of Atlanta, how the city was franchised for world consumption, but how it disfranchised, criminalized, and demonized the Black indigenous. And as a result of that, one of the things that I've been able to do is to actually put the data to the music to really kind of talk about the ways in which people have been marginalized, disfranchised, particularly in a city too busy to hate or the Black Mecca. And so we work against that. And so I've been considered to be the intellectual arm of the Dirty South. But I want to ask this question because all of us on this panel, we work in terms of activism and agency. And Brother Fahamu, I know that you have done serious work in terms of visual arts, or Professor Soltis, she would want me to call her doctor, so Professor Soltis.
I'm a commoner and I like it. So.
I know that you have done significant work in terms of educating undocumented young people. Ms. Freshour, I know that you've done serious work in terms of representing, labor movements and particularly looking at gender work. Can you go through the process as to how you create the product and what it means for the people? I mean, because it is a fine-tuned product, and how it's presented and how you capture those narratives.
Well, I guess I'll start. I usually end, whenever I give a talk, I usually end with this quote. In the future, historians will tell what happened. Artists will tell how it felt. And that's how I approach, any work that I do, any of my projects. I think about it in the sense of it being a record of where we are, who we are. And so, many of my projects, really begin by asking a series of questions. And my work ultimately presents a series of questions. It's about engaging in invoking, inspiring dialogues. And so, like the most recent project that I'm currently working on, which is actually a part of my dissertation for my PhD, is a project called Do or Die, Affect, Ritual, and Resistance, that brings together elements of hip hop culture, the Negritude movement, and Yoruba spirituality as a way to interrogate this spectacle of black male death. Particularly the rash of violence against black men that we've been seeing in the media, and thinking about how art can be a way to resist the stigma of the velocity of those images, like how we can create art that inspires life, that doesn't trivialize the experiences and the deaths of these men, but that also doesn't ossify and make us all widows, where we where our own movement, our own agency becomes arrested and we get stuck in this space. How art and how ritual can allow us a space to grieve, have a process of grieving, but also a process not of just survival, but of thriving. And so, my process, as I said before, is always to begin with a series of questions, like, how does this actually feel? What does this actually feel like for people who have experienced this? And how can I translate that into something that will get us, as viewers, to encounter this work and then begin to challenge the ways in which we think about these things that we're looking at? And so my work is really, like I said, it's about that. It's about that challenging, confrontation, and giving us a space where we have to interrogate things that we have become accustomed to seeing and looking at without being critical of. So.
Take the next one.
Sure. So I'm inspired by one of my good friends and scholars at UC Davis. Her name's Cheryl Ann Simpson. She's a critical geographer. She does urban studies work, but she put it to me this way. In her work, she's an observant participant, and I follow this in my work as well, this idea of being an observant participant. For my research, I was employed at one of the poultry plants in Northeast Georgia as a normal line worker to try to understand sort of what workers are going through on a daily basis, how they sort of take care of each other on and off the line. And after that work in the plant, I've been interviewing women, doing an oral history project, which Dr. Hobson knows a lot about, to really sort of better understand from their perspective, their experiences, and how work life shapes their home life and their life with their families. Oftentimes, I interview single mothers who are working at poverty wages. And this is work that's 8 or 10 hours a day, standing all day, doing repetitive motion work that's debilitating, mind-numbing, and frustrating work. And so I really think that their voices in particular are important for in contributing to national movements for living wage campaigns and paid sick days, right? So to really actually learn from working class families, and in particular working class mothers. And in the US South, these are majority marginalized Black and Latina mothers who are just so inspirational and strong, and I think that their voices need to be heard. So in addition to these oral histories, I'm attempting to also visualize their home lives through just photos of, not of their families or their children, but of like just their kitchens or the spaces that they deem important and that have value in their lives, to try to expand how we think about labor movements and these campaigns for economic justice.
I'm taking so many notes just on what they're saying. Sorry. I have like no notes for myself, but I think I can answer that based as an educator. I mean, process of making a product, I hate to think about movements as products to be consumed. I think that takes the power out of them and kind of the long-term revolutionary aspect of movements. Not that that's what you meant, but the term product just doesn't make me feel good. But I think as a teacher, which is the role I see myself as playing in this collective journey we're all on, is really believing in the power of liberatory education, where students aren't seen as empty receptacles in which adults fill, right? But to be in dialogue with young people who are themselves teachers that have a lot to teach us. And our students say that the education at Freedom U is that we teach them how to think and not to obey, right? I think disobedience is a very good thing, and we knock it out of kids really, really young. There's so many sayings at Freedom U, that no one educates you with the knowledge you need to overthrow them, except for me and the rest of the faculty at Freedom U. We encourage rebellion. But I think arts education is really important in this, and in thinking about different futures, different realities. And that's why in the spring, yes, we focus on SAT and ACT prep in the fall, but that's to get them into college and mess things up there. But I didn't say that. But in the spring, we focus a lot on the arts. We have a graphic design class taught by a formerly undocumented teacher. We have a freedom song group called the FU Singers. And we have a theater group as well. And we're working on a song called Ice by La Santa Cecilia about deportations. That's our a cappella group, sung by Mary, who's an undocumented student from Ghana, who's learned the Spanish, and everyone's very proud of her. And the theater group is acting out the lyrics of that song, right? But even in the very, very small space of Freedom U, the music, the theater, they are building power, right, among young people, that they can show their realities to people through art. And that liberatory power of education is how things have a possibility of change, right? But I think education oftentimes is a way in which we take the creativity out of young people, where we make them obedient, and that's where the power lies, is in our educational system. And so Freedom U, it started with the idea that it was founded right after the bans were passed in 2010, the bans against undocumented students. And I used to say, Freedom U shouldn't have to exist. But of course we have to exist. Everyone can use a freedom school education, not just undocumented youth. And so I hope that tradition of liberatory education of freedom schools really is reborn in the United States, whether in our public school systems or in alternative spaces. But I think education is absolutely key.
All right. I'm going to read some online questions, and I'm going to take this question here. It was written, Abyssis' performance was inspiring. What role can artists play in human rights? And I mean, we've talked about it, but let's get deep. Let's get like my man Abyss. Let's go as deep as we possibly can to kind of look at the ways in which artists can create curriculum. And I want to interject this. One of the age-old issues within African American history is the conversation about with art as propaganda. So, I mean, should art be created to promote the race, or should art be created for art's sake? And I think that there is a good space for both areas. But in turn, there is trouble in the land, and we need all hands on deck. And so the question again is, what role can artists play in human rights?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's looking at me. No, I mean, you know, again, I think that it's not even a question of if, you know. I think it's always been an outcropping of just human existence, that, you know, the things that we create reflect, you know, our experiences, reflect our desires, reflect, you know, our challenges. You know, they attempt to, you know, project, as you said, the world that we want to live in. You know, like art has always functioned in that capacity. I think, you know, to Carrie's point about the Black Panther Party, one of the greatest things that they did was to take control of the visual culture around the party and begin to create publications, begin to create a visual media campaign around the movement that reflected the ideals that they wanted to put out into the world, as opposed to having someone else dictate to the world what they look like. I think we see that in a lot of the Black arts movements throughout history, that Black artists have taken the initiative to use their art, to use their creativity, to use their performance and their writings, or whatever it may be, to tell their story, as opposed to waiting on somebody else to tell it for them. And I think that becomes the role of the artist, you know, in that sense, is that, you know, it is a space where, you know, as much as people might try to deny, it is a space where your agency can be fully expressed in ways that can't necessarily be controlled. Like, no one can make you draw what you draw. They can tell you to draw something, but, you know, ultimately that's coming through you. And so I think that becomes one aspect, and I think we've seen it, you know, again, throughout the history of, especially the Black experience in the Americas, where, you know, whether it was enslaved people taking the songs that they were taught, you know, as part of their Christian indoctrination, but turning it into art through Negro spirituals, you know. You know, it's always been a way of taking, you know, whatever was given to you and turning it into something that was great and what's the word I'm looking for? Transformative, thank you.
I do want to mention something too. I think I'm a photographer. I'm also a trained violinist. I went to UGA with a violin scholarship, which is hilarious because I don't play violin too much anymore. But I do sing in the FU Singers, but I do want to say something about music in particular. I think one of the limitations I feel sometimes in photography, well, even think about the words of photography, you take pictures, right? I try and say I make photographs, as if you're taking something away from people, you're stripping them of their own identity, of their own narratives. And so I struggle with that as a photographer sometimes. But I think one powerful aspect of music and human rights, to answer that question, is the foundation of human rights, as opposed to laws and constitutions, is that it recognizes human dignity, right? Inherent human dignity that can't be taken away. And I think music is very powerful in that respect, because when you hear music, it goes in, I think, in a way sometimes that words and visual art have some limitations, and it's participatory, right? Like you can sing along. And I think that was part of the power of a lot of, not to say that there's music of the 60s, right? But a lot of the music that was sung by SNCC and young activists is that it's participatory, right? We see the images of holding hands, that it was something that people could do together. It wasn't something to be consumed. And I think that in terms of music and human rights today, if it can be more participatory, that's where a lot of the power comes from. And I do want to highlight a piece as well in what you were speaking about in terms of humanizing, especially Black men shot by police. There's an amazing piece written by one of our professors at Freedom U called Seven Last Words of the Unarmed, written for a male chorus. And it was performed by the University of Michigan, but it was also Black, white, Latino, Asian men singing these words. You shot me. Mom, I'm going to college. And for people to have to say those words, it is no longer something that happened in the news, right? People have to live with those words, live with what that felt like. And I think that that's how music in particular is very powerful. And I really look forward to seeing how this generation engages human rights in music.
I will just add something small to that. So music as a form of resistance, I think, has been extremely powerful in labor movements and labor struggles historically and today. And just like a small note of something to mention at the plant that I was in, people would sort of sing, they would sing hymns, they would sing gospels, they would sing popular music to sort of pass the time and to sort of just to liven things up, to make things a little bit more interesting and to break up the monotony. But actually, supervision at this plant shut that down, and that I mean that's just that's a sign of the power that this music could have in connecting people, and then also how management or how the supervisors really are just trying to quell any of that sort of humanity on the line. It's incredible. It's insane.
All right, I'm going to take a question from the audience. People of different races and genders, sexualities have become caricaturized in popular media. Do you believe the increase in representation of these groups in popular media help aid the general population better understand these struggles? And this goes back to the conversation around representation, okay? So, Ms. Freshour, will you answer that question? Because I know that you do work in terms of, gendered spaces and work, and workplaces, and looking at the ways in which these shape the contours out in their outside lives, outside of work. Can you speak to that?
Representation in popular media. See, this is a little difficult. So I would say representation in, I guess, in leadership positions for the labor movement in general. I think that there is a concerted effort by a lot of the larger unions to put women of color in leadership positions, and I think that that is extremely important for organizers and for worker members to see that. I think it is empowering as much as that word is thrown around. I think that being able to see people who look like you in leadership positions is always important.
Can you ask the question as posed by the person again? There's a word that sparked, if you can find it.
Yeah. So the question is, do you believe the increase in representation of these groups in popular media help aid the general population better understand these struggles?
I read, I'm going to get the number wrong, a really alarming statistic recently that actually makes my throat close up a little bit, which is something like 56% of white millennials think that they face racism. Like, I don't even really know how to respond to that. And it's their perception and it's valid, but I think that might actually be the result of increased exposure to Blacks and Latinos and people of color in social media, is that when you are used to privilege, the assertion of humanity from people who are underneath your feet can feel like oppression, but it's not, right? When people gain human rights, you don't lose anything. Right? So, and so I think education among white youth is really important too, and especially highlighting historical figures of white anti-racists is very important. Looking at Pete Seeger, looking at Howard Zinn, that white people have stood up against racism. To have role models for young white youth, I think is very important too. Otherwise, this perception that they are facing discrimination and oppression it's troubling, right, when we understand history, when we understand that in Atlanta, the median household income for blacks is about $26,000, whereas for whites it's about $85,000, right? So when we're looking at economic justice and life expectancy, right, across races, it is seriously just a color spectrum, right? So for white millennials to feel that they are victims of racism is concerning. But it might be an unexpected outcome of increased access to Black media, which is fascinating.
For having Yuri Kochiyama on the Google
Yes.
page a few days ago. I mean, acknowledging her movement or her involvement in the Black liberation movement and connecting those two struggles is threatening, I think, to a lot of folks. And seeing that there is Asian support of Black Lives Matter is threatening to some people. It's disrupting this model minority myth that's placed on us oftentimes. And I think doing that was, I'm not sure of the reasoning behind Google's use of Yuri the other day, but I think that was incredible for Asian Americans and for everyone to know about her work and life, I think.
Absolutely.
Let me. So this is the mandate. The mandate is we're going to take a couple more questions, but I'm going to ask questions, and so they want one answer, and so whomever is interested in answering is welcome to do so. I think this is a very good one, and I might even jump in on this one too. Education used to be a public treasure. Please comment on the impact of partisan private interest on access to public education. How do you battle the lack of empathy with your work? Now, let me jump in on this because one of the things that I often talk about is the schools to prison pipeline. And this has been a long-standing conversation. I mean, this is the number one acquisition for African Americans coming out of enslavement was education. It is still the top acquisition, and it is often presented as if Black folk don't value education. However, it's not that they don't value education, they don't value discrimination in education. And so the thing that we understand is that prisons are built on third grade test scores. So people are tracked and put into these different places. A great book that deals with this was written in 1988. Dr. James Anderson wrote a book, The Education of Blacks in the South, and it talked about how education was set up to track African Americans to be of service. So it was not for you to have an autonomous community. But we are in a city that had the largest cheating scandal in the history of the United States, and it overwhelmingly impacted Black and brown children. And so if you guys, if one of you all would be interested in answering this question, so let me rephrase it. Can you please comment on the impact of partisan private interest on access to public education? And so. Yes. I see you.
I will just make it very clear by giving an example. Georgia, the university system of Georgia, which runs public higher education, look who runs it. Okay? There are 19 members of the Board of Regents. Yes, I'm calling them out. Go to their website and read their profiles. 18 are CEOs and businessmen with no experience in education. 2 women, 1 person of color. They are CEOs and beer distributors who are in charge of our education system, okay? And they are appointed by Governor Deal. So when we're talking about why there might be racism in higher education, why there's modern segregation in the South, right? We're pretending that, that immigrants don't have race, right? And to speak about criminalization, and this is, again, these intersections of the school to prison pipeline. The Corrections Corporation of America, again, who profits from this, not only own prisons, which, again, 50% of young Black men under the age of 23 have been arrested, right? But they also own private immigrant detention centers. Stewart Detention Center in Southwest Georgia, one of the largest in the country, also owned by the Corrections Corporation of America. right? So of course there are private interests in making sure some people go to college and some people go to jail, right? And it's not surprising when you look at who runs the governing bodies of our school system. So let's be aware of this, right? That it's not some mystery. It's all there for public viewing. And there's just general apathy, I think, on the part of the public of not being aware of these issues. So let's call it out for what it is, first of all. But yeah, I think what you were saying about the school detention and school to prison pipeline is destroying our communities today.
So this is the last question, and it would be good if all three could answer it short in a very brief kind of capacity. But what's the biggest change you would like to see in American rights in the next 5 years?
Who would hit us with a question like that last?
Yep, you would.
And ask us to answer it briefly.
As my grandmother once told me when I wrote my dissertation, she said, if you could put it in a haiku, it would save you time.
575. I'll write one right now.
Let me take a stab at this. My position on this is something that is going to really lean towards gender, particularly in terms of women being compensated fairly and women reproductive rights. And I'll share something with you all. My wife and I were at a football game once at Auburn, and we had gone into the restroom, and when you go into a male restroom at a stadium, it's like a trough, and everybody can just stand and do what they need to do. But there was a line outside of the women's restroom, and so my wife waited in the line for like 20 minutes. I walked in and walked back out, and she looks at me and she says, it's clear that there were not women on the design, with the design committee. And it was an aha moment for me. I was like, I said, because if there were, there would be 8 times as many, stalls, because, it's more involved. And I tell my students, racism works the same way. Sexism works the same way. I mean, it's an issue of power. But it's a very arrogant kind of thing for men to sit around and to make decisions on women's health care and reproductive rights and not consider women. And I say that because my wife and I run a reproductive ministry at our church for black women who struggle with having children. And that also falls into the reproductive kind of conversation and how hard it is to start families, particularly of which is a major issue within black women. But the image that has been portrayed of black women as being, overly promiscuous and the welfare queen in terms of having babies is greatly misrepresented in that. And so that would be that's my greatest change. That's what I would like to see. But would you guys like to say something?
I'll just try to keep it pretty simple. I touched on this earlier about the notion of engagement. And I think, what I would like to see is people take the initiative to educate themselves and to get more engaged in the various processes as it relates to human rights, as it relates to politics. I hear a lot of people express frustration with the political process, particularly as we are in a election season, looking at presidential candidates, and every 20 minutes somebody changes the rules on how things works, and and everybody's kind of throwing their hands up like it doesn't matter anyway. It actually does matter when you make it matter, right? And so maybe the way the system works now doesn't actually work, and it becomes on us to make it work, right? And so I would like to see more engagement.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to answer this question. I'm thinking of so many ways. thinking about the education component. I'm thinking about all these different things, but.
Yeah, you guys probably know mine. So living wages, definitely, and paid sick days. I think that for me in the work that I've been doing, most people turn to the poultry because it's the highest paying job and it pays every week. And compared to fast food work, compared to service, retail, work at Walmart, it's the best job based on the salary. So if we were able to increase the minimum wage nationwide, I think that people would have more rights in low-wage work and work that is overly exploited, like in the poultry plants. Paid sick days as well, in recognition that many workers, and particularly women workers, are caretakers, are life givers, are mothers, are taking care of grandmothers, grandfathers, et cetera, the elderly. This recognition is also important for any civil rights movement today. And I think finally just, well, you can talk about equal access to education. I'll let him take that one.
I actually wrote a haiku.
Uh-oh.
Not just because I'm Japanese, but I was inspired. I would like to see for race not to determine who lives and who dies.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, are all hearts and minds clear? It's been a pleasure to moderate this panel. Please give the panel a great round of applause.
One, I have to definitely mention that it is Hip Hop Appreciation Month, so like this. And the reason why is because when we speak of civil rights, every conversation has something to do with everybody up here. And the more and more that I listen to what the conversation was, I'm hearing why I chose my career path. Because I was in the workplace where you really couldn't say what you wanted to say. And then when you're looking for the voice, and I guess my background, I only had limited education to what, you know, if somebody wants you in power, they will get you into power. Right. If they don't want you there, they have a way to get you out of there. And what we do, we get knocked down with what we're doing. So with what's being said, and y'all give it up for every panelist up here. They all had ideas. And it makes my spirit feel full. It makes me know that this is God making the hole in one for me. You know what I'm saying? I was supposed to be here. Like, I was supposed to be here. Thank you again, Mr. Chisholm as well. So, Mrs. Server. So, Sherrod, give me, we're going to do a gunpowder. And this is what we're going to do. She said we should be participatory. Right? So I want all of y'all, it's a simple hook, but I just want y'all to hear it, because if we don't hear it now, where are we going to hear this actual conversation? All right? Let's go, boys. So we're going to start it simple. I'm going to find out what my choir at, all right? So check it out. So this is how it starts off. So check it out. It's easy. Oh, hey, sound good. Spoken word. What's that in the air? Okay. What's that in the air? Gunpowder. It's like they really don't care about us. I said, what's that in the air? Gunpowder. It's like they really don't care about us. It's like the powers that be done lost their grip, and you're not above the law. Karma wants a kiss. Break out the riot gear, they pumping a black fist. We done woke a sleeping giant, they madder than hey. What's that in the air? Gunpowder. It's like they really don't care about us. They kill our sons before they get a chance to shine. Kill our dreams so we can't expand our minds. Taught me out English, pulling on a Newport. It used to be sky's the limit, now life's too short. Most of this is self-inflicted excuses. People addicted to this chicken. Yes, I wish I ate fish more. What's that in the air? Gunpowder. I hear you quiet. Hey, it's like they really don't care. Yeah, sound good. I said, what's that in the air? Y'all hear that, community? Hey, it's like they really don't care. Check it. What happens when you can't breathe and the long gone trying to put you to sleep and they won't stop till you're 6 feet deep? Control yourself before it's blood in these streets now. The revolution is coming. The revolution is here. The revolution is coming. The revolution is here. Whoa. Hey. Whoa. Spoken word. Today I'm student, tomorrow I'm teacher. Be at the sidelines, end zone, skybox, bleachers. Some got to change cause the anger can't feed us. Do you know what happens mixing lions and cheetahs? Woo. It get to cracking like a skillet of fajitas. Somebody leaving salty like a rim of margaritas. Sound like a happy hour up at Applebee's. These are neighborhood bars, pardon me. I'm from a place, yes, they call it Detroit. Authentic, you can tell me from them decoys. Shirts, skins, crack fiends, D-boys. They call me public enemy, yes, I bring noise. What's that in the air? Hey, hey, it's like they really don't care. I love y'all, I love y'all. I said what? What's that in the air? Hey, hey, it's like they really don't care. Y'all give it up for yourselves. That's hip-hop right there. Spoken word. Thank you.
This is what I'm used to. What a wonderful way to start a Saturday. That concludes our program. The museum is open. We have a fabulous exhibit called The Continual Struggle. That's charcoal etchings of the movement. Our panelists will hang around for a few minutes. I want to take this time to thank the Archives Foundation, my colleagues at NARA, and especially my staff. Khalil Chisholm, our education specialist. Danielle was our volunteer coordinator. Steve Olson, Tony Clark, my deputy, David Stanhope. We're here for Atlanta. This is going on month 6 for me. So if you thought this was great, imagine what's coming next. So just thank you for coming. The museum is open. You can exit that way if you like, or you can exit that way and go around. So thank you so much.